Cool. Who's hosting? Who's recording?
I am. And John, you have the first item.
Oh, I do. I do have the first item. So this was already resolved like a week and a half ago. I probably should have put it into the APAC meeting, but Alex graciously agreed to be the technical DRI for work items and for coming up with the technical plan for that. So thank you very much.
Yep. And yeah, this has been announced in a couple of meetings, but just for the record, we are moving on with the issues table for the work items. And yeah, I think the next item is also mine. I'll be taking a couple of weeks off in almost 2 weeks. So if there is anything that I can help to unblock, as I'm the DRI for the technical stuff on the work items, if there are any questions or anything that I need to be pushing forward faster to unblock everyone or anyone, let me know.
Are there any other blockers other than the issue table? I'm going to clear out the blockers at the top of the main epic here. Are there any other
technical things, I think, but some of them can be sort of postponed to some future iterations, but just work to be done. Like, how do we map each work item type to the widgets? How do we do the hierarchy widget? How do we do the custom field and all that stuff, which currently we don't have like clear, crisp answers to, but that's something to be worked on.
Okay, and would those be blocking MVC1 assignees? That's a widget, right?
Yeah, if we don't have, I don't remember what we have in the MVC1, if we don't customize any of the work item types, in the sense that we would be letting users to specify which widgets belong to which work item types. So if we can hard code that, that's fine. We can move forward with that. So we can just specify which widgets belong to which work item types without allowing it to be configurable. Then we can move forward with that. And I think MVC1 doesn't have the hierarchy, does it?
No, that's MVC2.
So then we are pretty much unblocked on the MVC1, I think. I'll have to take a look at the issues that we have there and dive a bit more into details, see if we really have any blockers there, but I think we should be fine.
And just so I'm clear, that the decision to how they get assigned together, that would be, is that more still on the back end, or do the front ends get more involved with that technical decision?
The assignment we will need the front end as well, because the front end will need to know, I think at some point, which widgets to ask for. So if you have a issue page, you'll need to load a certain number or certain list of widgets. If you have a bug page, you'll need to load a different set of widgets. And there is, like, in my understanding, there is a slight difference in between, does that type not have the widget active, or is that widget not having any data? There needs to be some sort of a clear difference in between these two states.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's states, sometimes maybe even CRUD, and feedback or error messages on each individual widget.
Yeah, and there are more questions on how do we handle lists? How do we handle table-like lists? Does frontend need that information up front, or we can provide it once we provide the data? So yeah, there were some more questions to be answered, but I think that's not MVC1, so.
Okay.
I was just going to vocalize that I think all of the, as far as assignees for MVC1, all the work item types will have them except for requirements. And I think that's what Mark would say. Could be wrong, but we can double check.
Okay.
One bit which I'm not sure if it's blocker, but we will need it to clarify for first MVC is clarifying how API will look like. And we will have to figure out how we will represent widgets to front end.
Does API have its own, I guess that's built in. Is there an actual decision issue for that, or is that in the main technical discussion only?
So it was already discussed in extensible issue before. I'm not sure whether we plan to discuss this now again in technical discussion, but I think there wasn't conclusion yet how API will look like for work items.
Okay, so that one's still pending, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. And then for all of these, the decisions, the technical implementation issues will have to be created. So if we know the direction we're going with issue tables, what do we need to get that up? Are there any implementation issues? Same with API. Let's keep thinking about that and checking what's in the MVCs and make sure we have everything from an engineering standpoint.
I wonder how much of reusing the issues table is actually going to be done anyway with the move from requirements to issue types. You know, like
Right.
we'll have to think about like, well, we're going to solve like some problems doing that. It doesn't mean like we'll do everything exactly the way the architecture blueprint, if you like, would want us to do it, I guess, because like the number of features that requirements have is they either have the exact same features as issues, you know what I mean? They don't have anything unique, I don't think. Whereas when we get to epics, they have hierarchies which are unique.
Just looking at this for MVC 0, it looks like there's already weighted issues in, which is really awesome. What's the gut feel? Is this populated? Do you think this is half of what we might actually need to execute?
Oh, I think there's definitely more that we'll need to execute on. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it comes down to where. I think it comes down to where we draw the line around like what backend architecture means as MVC 0. I mean, once we get into like, I mentioned this somewhere in a comment that like MVC 0 and MVC 1 will start to overlap once we kind of get these initial three weighted issues that are in there done, and we kind of have made some of the decisions out of the technical discussion. We, I think, can start on MVC 1, like that, but I don't know, Brett, I don't want to short sell what you were just saying, but there's definitely more to be done there.
Okay. Looks good. It's awesome to see everything in already and the plan moving forward. So we'll continue in iteration and planning breakdown of all of it. So just let's keep populating them. And also, I think that front-end team's going to be kicking off their architecture now that they're unblocked. So that also will start moving along.
Donald, it may have been right as you were joining, but we were talking about, Jan brought up the fact that we haven't necessarily designed the API for how it will change from issues to work items, and specifically like around widgets and things like that. So I guess when that discussion will open up once the front end starts kind of working through how those things will get on the page. So I guess we should either spin up a separate discussion issue or have a topic in the overall technical discussion on like what needs to change from the API perspective for the front end to succeed as well.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Are you primarily talking around? Yeah, because is the GraphQL API design going to change depending on the positioning and the existence of widgets in a work item, or will that be a separate API being able to get the widgets that belong to a specific work item? We probably don't have that answer.
I never actually
I think that's where we need to decide.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Would you want to query work item types? Like, would you want an API for actually like tell me what work item types this group uses or something like that? Because
Maybe.
otherwise, like, yeah, I mean,
you'll need that eventually.
Really?
Well, if you ever want to let somebody create their own work item type, right? So you're gonna have to have a CRUD for creating a type and then specifying which widgets you want to use, even if they're all like not custom widgets, but the default widgets, right? You will need that. I don't know when we want to do that. Don't have to do it for MVC1, but I don't see another way to like CRUD work item types for as an end user, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's some strange like design questions that are raised by GraphQL. Like if I ask for all work items of type requirement and I ask for title, description, and assignees. Let's say I ask for all work items of type requirement or issue and I ask for title, description, and assignees, and work items or requirements don't have assignees. What happens? I should get assignees for the issues, right? But what does the resulting object for requirements look like? And what happens if I just do that for requirements, right?
I think you'll have to preload the widgets available for a specific work item type first, and then kind of go from there. That's one way, at least, to go through that, because that's where you need to decide. Because like otherwise, if you ask for assignees for the requirement and you get null, you're not sure, do I display the widget with the null values or do I just not display it at all? So you kind of have to have the definitions up front, I guess.
Just don't return the assignee attribute. And then if it's not returned in the data object, then the front end knows that it doesn't exist.
It's going to have to return as null though, isn't it? So that I think that's Alexander's point, is that if we get a null assignees, we don't know if it's if we should show the assignees widget or if we should show the assignees widget without any assignees.
Yeah.
Do you have to return null? Do you have to return anything if it doesn't exist? I mean, like if it's not supported on that type, can you just leave that attribute off? Or I don't know.
I don't know.
I think that's the key. You're gonna have to know what widgets the type currently is allowing to be visible. So between that and what data comes back, you'll know the answer. So if assignees can be visible for that particular type, then a null means you should still show the widget, but with nobody assigned.
Yeah, but I wonder like what the GraphQL spec says. Like, is it okay to request an arbitrary thing that doesn't exist on an object and have it just return everything else and ignore that you asked for something? Do you know what I mean? Instead of returning that thing with null, because like a requirement doesn't know what assignees are conceptually, like, right? It doesn't support them, doesn't understand them. So,
but it's going to, isn't it?
Yeah,
requirement is just going to be an issue type, which all issue types will support assignees. Just requirements won't have them visible, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, so you basically will get nulls for the requirements just because it doesn't support it, or it will just not have data. There is the other aspect of it when you switch types, right? You'll have data, but you don't want to show it. There is the other facet of the coin as well. Say you had an issue which had assignees, you change it to the requirement, and now you ask for data and you get assignees, which you should not actually show because this requirement does not support the assignees widget.
It's weird though, because if forgetting about the front end for a second, if I'm just a user of the API, I'm able to query requirements for assignees and receive null, but I'm not able to set an assignee, which like maybe that's the lesser of two evils. I wonder, does GraphQL have an undefined as well as a null? Probably not. Well, I don't know, maybe, because undefined
there is a way
would make more
to
sense.
query for that, and I've pasted a sample. I think there are better ways to do that, but like you can filter out some of these values based of the metadata sort of that you store in. But we need to be careful also how we store the column names and stuff like that, especially with the custom column names, so that we don't allow for SQL injection. That will be one of the security problems that we need to face, I think. But yeah, I'll link to the sample query that I had.
If I remember correctly, null is GraphQL has null only. Like there's no other falsy type. And then it's sort of it almost sort of overloads like the idea of what null is, which is kind of I guess part of the design, but also a bit annoying for this specific instance.
Yeah, I would expect that we would just return null, no matter if the attribute is not supported for the given type. The benefit is that then you can smoothly list all the types together, and you can dig or drill down in the query, and it will not fail. Yeah, because if we would start somehow validate or filtering out some attributes for each type, then user wouldn't be able to, for example, write a query, give me all issue types and give me assignees for type where for issues where the type is issue, and it would just fail because we would filter out that attribute for other types. So it's better to return just nil value.
But if you filter out that attribute, it means that you don't want to return those. So if you want to see a list, for instance, of issues and requirements that have assignee Alexandru, then you'll basically never see requirements in that list because requirements doesn't support assignees, right?
Well, so if you would list issues and requirements and ask for assignee, where assignee is, well, yeah, if you would filter by assignee, yeah, then requirements wouldn't be returned. On the other side, if the query would be give me all types and give me these specific fields for each of the issue.
Yeah, returning null.
Right, yeah, and it will work.
Makes sense.
Cool. I think we're good on that then. Any further comments?
Yeah, on it. And we don't have to discuss this synchronously on call, but we will also have to keep in mind how to deal with REST API, because I suspect that if we make some changes how issues work, then we will need some support also in REST API unless we completely deprecate the existing issues API. Yeah, so I think that the API support overall will be quite tricky.
So maybe we'll need to revisit what we do in MVC1 then, because it seems stuff just piles on as we go, right? Like the more we dive into it, the more stuff we figure out we need to do. So I'm not sure if MVC1, with the current MVC1 is actually the MVC1 that we will be doing.
I don't think we need the REST API straight out of the gate. A lot of this is going to be behind a feature flag, et cetera. And I think we probably need to make the decision that REST stuff is going to be implemented on top of GraphQL and start moving in that direction anyway. But that's a different discussion.
Yeah, perhaps. But yeah, but still better to keep it in mind.
And MVC1 should just be the plumbing and a few fields. And so something like assignees or widgets is making it bigger, we can cut it. We can still, as long as we can get something showing up on the screen and saving, we can have fields and things like that.
So, yeah, okay.
Okay, good discussion there. And keep breaking these issues down and asking those questions. Is MVC1 small enough? That's a good question to ask because we can break them still. So that's still, it's not set in stone just because it's there in the epic. It's just, that's just the starting point.
Cool. Do we want to verbalize PTO announcements or skip?
We can probably skip.
Yeah, in the interest of privacy on a recorded call, maybe we'll skip it. Cool. So that's my item then. So I'm not sure if this is big picture updates, now that it's in context, but I thought everybody here would be interested to know. So we planned this issue to improve the performance of the epics discussions endpoint as a Q3 OKR. But the root cause is the same root cause that is at the root of maybe 10 other issues, maybe more than that, that span like a wide range of things, not just discussions, but API endpoints and so on. API endpoints for discussions, but also API endpoints for other things as well. The point is like that this is like quite different from a lot of the other performance things that we've looked into recently, which have been database related. This is CPU and memory bound. And it's to do with the Banzai pipeline. The way, I think the best way to approach it is to try and come up with a single metric and then set a target for that metric, the same sort of way we did with the test efficiency project, and then try to bring in contributions from around the company, because this doesn't just affect us, but it also affects MR loading times and you know, different parts of the application. So Brett, you're on the call. I was gonna make this a rhetorical question, but like maybe since you're on the call, you can let me know. Like, so I noticed that you'd worked on some benchmarking tools before, and I tried them out. They were really useful. You know, maybe there's something in that we could build a single metric from around the benchmarking tools, and it takes a long time to run the benchmarks and that kind of thing. But maybe there's something there that we could draw out and build a single metric. I'm thinking something like if we could have some seed data where we could run the pipeline, like different parts of the pipeline individually on that seed data, then anyone who wanted to make a small contribution to this for any size of an improvement could test it against that test data and see if it's actually an improvement in all conditions, and then include that on their MR. I mean, what do you think?
No, I think that's a good idea. I think I have an old issue out somewhere. I actually wanted to get basically daily or commit level runs of the pipelines to see what the performance numbers were over time to understand how they're affected by different changes. So I think that would be useful too. There's also Grafana in our plan page reporting. Also some measurements of the Banzai pipeline now. They're now graphed out. So there's a few points in there that we can enhance on if we need to.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Actually, I haven't seen that. So if you ping me the link for it sometime, I'll try and find it after the call. But yeah, that'd be really useful. Sean McGivern, I mentioned in the comment on the bottom, you can read that there. Like he did I don't know how to describe it, like a topological analysis of the discussions endpoint as it is across all the sort of well, they would be percentiles, but they're like durations, right? So as you get higher and higher up the durations, the least performant discussions are allocating hundreds of megabytes in memory and taking a lot of time in the CPU. So it's a really interesting problem, and we get to be like really creative about it because it's like not a common problem for us. Like typically Ruby's quite fast, at least in it's not as slow usually as their data sources. Like, so when you want to tune, you typically go to the data source and start there. But this is one of the interesting ones, which is actually CPU memory bound, like resource bound. And so there may be lots of opportunities for fixes. But like, you don't have to be particularly technical to see this problem. Anytime just you go to a deep link in a long discussion, you'll notice that the page loads. You may scroll for a bit, and once the discussion loads, you're automatically scrolled to that deep link or nearby it. It's just not a great experience. And by speeding up the Banzai pipeline, since every comment, I guess, and every part of the discussion runs through that pipeline, we should start to see improvements right across the site.
Yeah, well, I think most of that's with the redaction and filling in mentions and stuff like that. Because it's not re-rendering. It's not re-rendering those comments completely. But it's also, I'd have to look at it, but I don't know if it's completely the Banzai pipeline, because we're pulling those in. I don't know if they're separate requests or from the UI, or they're pulling them in like in one shot. You know, I haven't looked at that depth either, but there's definitely more work to do in the Banzai pipelines, and I haven't finished the work yet on the caching of certain components either. So it's an ongoing piece of work.
Yeah, and on that, there is like a caching project going on for merge request discussions at the minute that's kind of interesting. And I don't know, I'm somewhat skeptical about it, because I think it's going to have to be cached on a per user basis, which is going to result in loads of keys and lots of cache expiration. But until we see it on the wild, we can't say for sure whether it would be productive or not.
Yeah, I had the same concerns.
Yeah, and do you want to verbalize what you're typing?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I interpret the comment you link correctly. It seems that 99% of these comments are relatively fast, based on the percentile of the 1 second request, and we are aiming mainly for the individual ones, which are relatively rare.
Yeah, it depends. Like, yeah, I'm not sure about that, to be honest. Well, anything over a second is a pretty horrible experience with regards to the discussion. So yeah, I mean, 10,000 out of maybe 450,000 are just between the 1 second and 2 second mark. There's definitely some kind of higher impact though, because those issues that we have that are related to API slowness in the reference architectures seem to be related to markdown rendering as well. And those relate to higher memory use. So even if, I guess, like, even the requests that take less than a second allocate on average like 7 megabytes. Like, I mean, so that's still quite a lot. And then between 1 and 2 seconds, you're up to 70 megabytes. The ones that take 2 seconds or more, 130, 140 megabytes. I mean, it grows pretty quickly. Like, so even if we didn't see that much in the way of speed increases, we'd see like quite a lot of improvement on our reference architectures.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks for typing, Kristen. Yeah, and you for the next point.
Yeah, just a quick update that there was with Imre, we worked on POCs related to project group consolidation. Imre created a POC merge request which shows how to convert epics to project level. And I worked on POC, which tries to move issues to the group level. The POCs have pretty limited scope. It's just about creating a resource from Rails console and exposing this in API. But I hope that from POCs, it's still obvious the overall direction or idea, which in a nutshell is basically that all resources will be moved to a namespace. So it's something like the shadowed group idea, which was discussed in the blueprint. So if you are interested or if you have a minute, please take a look at POCs and leave some comments or ideas or consents.
Given that it seems like POCs show that we can go both ways now, right? With epics to project and with issues to group. Do we have to make a decision which way we actually go, or how does that work?
Well, strictly speaking, it's the idea is that the direction is one. The direction is that the resources will be that we introduce a project namespace, which is a subclass of namespace, and we move relationship of resources, association of resources to this namespace. So if project it belongs to a if issue belongs to project, it will be migrated to the project's namespace, which is something like shadowed group discussed in previous ideas. And same for epics. If epics is now for epic will not belong to a group, but it will belong to a namespace. Yeah, so namespace can be still a group or a project namespace. So yeah. So unless there are any other questions, Alex, you have next item.
Yeah, so this one is more of an FYI about capturing the developer docs on work items, work item types, and all other technical discussion or developer discussion. So I've opened an MR and pinged front end and backend engineers in plan. So please do contribute and help to refine that documentation so we can merge the MR and move from there. And then I have the next item as well, which I think we kind of discussed in the, and this is not for MVC1, I don't think. This is also related to how do we map the work item types to the widgets and all that nice stuff. So I think the first iteration we can just hard code it somewhere, somehow, so that we know that, for instance, the existing work item types like issue and incident and test case have these hard coded widgets or columns to make it clearer. But then in the next iteration, we need to somehow store this data in the database so that customers can either remove or add specific widgets, even to the predefined work item types. At least that's my understanding of where we're moving towards. And then comes the iteration of actually having customer defined work item types that will get the same predefined widgets associated to the customer defined type now. And then the next one is with the custom widgets themselves. So that's how I'm imbuing it in my head. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so my question about this custom widgets was to what extent these widgets are expected to be customized by users, because my understanding was that we would basically allow users to create their own custom type for which they would be able to select what widgets they want to use for this type. So, but customization of widgets is another user story, which it depends on where on roadmap it is, whether we should include it in the structure now, and what exactly are users expected to be able to customize. If it's just title, like renaming the widget in UI, or is it something else?
So my understanding from like the roadmap that we can take is that we will introduce these predefined work item types. We'll hard code the mapping between the widgets. The next step would probably be to make this, to allow kind of the customers to customize the widgets on the predefined work item types. So they can, like, if we have issue that has a due date and the customer doesn't want due date on the issue, they should be able to remove that widget from the issue type, from the issue work item type.
Yes, that's what I meant by widget selection. Yeah,
so that's one. Then the customization of widgets themselves, I think title would be like, and I think product should speak to that. Do we want to allow due date to be renamed to end date, or wait to be renamed to story points, and so on? And then there is also a lot of other stuff that can be added to the existing widgets, right? Make it required, make it have a default value, make it, a lot of customizations can be added. And I don't know where on roadmap that is, or how much of that customizations we want on the predefined widgets that we have.
My perspective is what Brett said above my comment is visibility initially, then being able to create, like, because we have to do parenting on issues and all this other stuff so that we can get the feature, right? And that's like the first thing. But then it's visibility to turn widget on or off that already exists, being able to create a custom work item type and pick the widgets you want to use from a list of pre-existing widgets that we've built. And then later it's the idea to create custom fields or custom widgets so that you can then store data that you want, that you define on a work item, basically. This is all like in the 1 year roadmap, but we can definitely separate out the concerns as we go so that we can do it iteratively. And like, it's good to have that in mind when we do architecture, but we also can do whatever we want to avoid over engineering things early on if we don't need to. That's my perspective.
Yeah, and building on that, I think UX would have to determine for each individual widget if it would be editable to something like as solid as due date. I don't think I could see letting them rename that. Doesn't make sense. Other things will build off that date, but potentially like points or something would be. But for now, for the MVCs at least, and for a while, I don't see us having intense renaming at that widget level, although the plumbing should be there.
We also thought about, or I was thinking about using our translation tokens and letting somebody just create their own translation if they want to change the language or everything in the UI.
Right.
It's probably a horrible idea, but you know, I think that's definitely like, I would put that as the cherry on top way down the road to let people rename stuff that already exists to whatever they want.
But the documentation nightmare too for users.
So to make it clear and to clarify, I'm sorry, like we don't foresee in the near future to be renaming field names or widget names to give them like different titles, right? That's further down the line. I don't know, maybe somewhere when we do custom fields, is that?
I feel like we shouldn't necessarily, did I freeze or did he freeze?
He froze.
He froze.
I was gonna give it, oh, Alex, you're back, you froze. I thought you had stopped, sorry. If you want to finish your comment.
I don't know where I stopped, but I did finish my comment, but I don't know at which point you heard me finish.
I was just going to add, from a usability perspective, I don't think we should give them the ability to rename the widgets so much as maybe the custom names for the elements that the widget references. Am I misunderstanding something there, Gabe, in terms of the vision for that?
No, you're not.
I'm not sure I understand that last phrase.
Like the widget might display health status, and that's a thing in our documentation. Holly, are you saying the label for it, like the column header would be editable, but not the actual mechanics of the widget, the health status widget?
No, I'm thinking in the example of health status, you wouldn't be able to rename health status, but you could rename the
indicators,
the labels associated with health status. You know what I mean? Like, so health status of,
like I would rename those right now.
Right, to something that makes more sense for their business. That's what I would expect. The core widget would always be named the same thing, but they could customize the values. The values, yes, thank you.
That's a possibility. Another one is like a likely scenario that I know a lot of customers would do today is they would use the underlying like members data, whether a group member or project member, to create a new field like owner, or to be able to create specific roles that they want to be able to assign and specify within the issue, like designer, sort of like how we built the reviewers features into merge requests. There's like a lot of requests for that same sort of behavior, but kind of different ways. So using the underlying data to call it something else, but not changing what we've predefined as like project members, right?
So even for the health status, changing the values that you have in the health status, how far down the line do you foresee that being?
That will be, I mean, I would think at least maybe a year before we get into that nuance of it, because we need to get everything we have. We need to get parity in. And templating the actual work items is more important, I would say, probably than that, from my perspective.
So then the work item types, like assigning specific widgets to specific work item types is more recent, right, on the roadmap. That's something that needs to happen sooner.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the on and off of the individual fields is sooner, yes.
Okay.
And the way the objects relate to each other in the parenting.
Yeah, I guess the on and off is even before we do hierarchy. I think that's somewhat easier to implement now than implementing the hierarchy. So that will probably end up sooner on the roadmap. So we will be able to define which widget belongs to which work item type dynamically sooner than we have the hierarchies, I would expect.
We skipped, or I skipped, sorry, Holly, the design section. Can we take the last 5 minutes and go back and verbalize some of that?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead. Is somebody else about to speak?
No, I just said yes out loud without mute on. Sorry.
I had created an issue, Donald asked the other day where the conversations were occurring surrounding the design, and I realized that I didn't really see an issue that I felt properly addressed that specific conversation. So I went ahead and created this issue. It does have all of the designs posted in there, although they are changing some. So I noted there also that there are some minor changes that are happening to the designs based on conversations with Jeremy about design patterns. And sorry, my dog just whined, about design patterns and accessibility in particular. So this includes reducing the margin around the page, not anything major, I would say. They're just making it a little bit more, little less white space so that we're taking more advantage of the real estate and being consistent with our current design patterns. Also adding in labels. This is something that Jeremy and I are digging into right now. Do we have to have labels or can we get rid of those? And the concern is that screen readers don't have a way to properly identify what these items are without the labels. primarily when data has been added. So in the case of inline editing, if we have, let me just share my screen really, really quick. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
So in the case of inline editing, when we have the initial title here, we have placeholder text that gives some instruction as to how to interact with that element. But once you've added in data, there's no way to clearly identify that this is editable by a screen reader. It doesn't necessarily know what to do with it. And according to Jeremy, this is actually something that we could get fined for. We could really have some big problems as a result. So we are exploring adding in labels once data has been added, but again, looking for ways to see if there's a way to get around it. If there's not, then that might be something we'll have to change.
Ollie, does it have to be editable, like looking at it now or on, I guess there's no hover on mobile, that's why, right? Like you could have the whole area kind of light gray to indicate that it lights up, but that won't happen until you like touch it on mobile.
That's true, but that's also more of a visual indicator, and the screen reader is looking in the code for specific instructions to give that guidance. Something else that I'm still trying to understand, and I'm not finding a ton of documentation on it, unfortunately, is how the screen reader experience differs on mobile versus on desktop and what those tools are looking for. So that's also something that he and I are digging into and trying to understand. The other thing is that because we're using inline editing, he's concerned that when the screen reader goes top to bottom of the DOM, so one, we do need to have consistency with the order of these items. And I think on the desktop version, I had status and assignees listed above the title, but that creates a complication for the screen readers. So I'm going to make that consistent. But then also as it reads from top to bottom, anything that is an input field or a type of form element where you can input data, it kind of gets stuck on it and provides the user with all of these additional options. So that means that in order for them to simply read the description of the page, it would have to get stuck on all these different pieces. So that's something else where I'm trying to understand, is there a way that we can say, ignore these things when there's data added, or, you know, how can we reduce the friction of that experience as much as possible? We can't solve all the things, I think, early on. We can always just get kind of a base, here's what we think is going to be the best experience, and then iterate on it. That's my goal. But I do want to at least have understanding before we dive right in as to what we're up against, and if there is any way that we can kind of quickly address that before we get too deep into the coding. So that's really my update as far as all of the changes. You can also see some of the things that we had talked about yesterday. This is the original proposed design. This is the design that Jeremy recommends because it's already using patterns that we have defined as being accessible, as well as have been vetted and approved for good usability. This changed to an existing button. So it used to be a little circle button. Now it's a square button that's using one of our existing patterns. And then changing the color and the weight of these in some cases so that they are compliant with 503 and like contrast for typography and colors. He also recommended adding in the breadcrumbs at the top here, but I want to truncate those maybe in the middle at some point because they do wrap and get kind of unruly. But the primary benefit here is that there was no way to, from again, more so an accessibility standpoint, there's no way to let the user know where they've landed. They may have selected to create a new work item, but once they're here, there's nothing telling them that that's what they're actually doing. So having the breadcrumbs there does provide that insight. I know that's not MVC, the breadcrumbs, but that is something that I think we'll need to add in pretty quickly to help give that additional insight.
Holly, can I give just one idea here? Mm-hmm. Is it possible to make the breadcrumb a drop down so that you see the new work item, but you click on it and then you'd see the entire breadcrumb path? That would make that a little smaller and a little cleaner, maybe.
I'm not sure if you said drop down. I'm not sure if you meant drop down or popover, but we have been talking about doing like a popover approach where instead of having, maybe this center breadcrumb here, we could just have like an ellipsis, which is a pattern that we currently have in some places. But then when you click the breadcrumbs, you see like an overlay or a little popover that shows the full breadcrumbs, so you don't have to display the whole thing in that tiny little space. Is that kind of what you were referring to, or did you mean something else?
No, that's basically what I thought. When I say menu, though, I mean a clickable button that drops down a list.
We do that already.
Difference.
I put a screenshot under 7 of how we do that when there's long breadcrumbs. If you want to look. Yeah, I run it as all the time because I'm demoing in these like super deeply nested projects and groups or groups and projects. So you could do something like that and just, instead of showing tech marketing before or the first one, you could just have the ... and then the current place. Good work.
I wonder too, just this coming back to the screen reader part, can't you denote the primary content in its order for the skipping actions of the screen reader? So you could still say title, then description, then the assignees, then the labels, as long as they have the ability to skip to next, essentially.
Are you asking if you can programmatically note the order so that the screen reader goes in a certain flow?
I'm pretty sure you can.
I think that you can. I know you can do it with tabbing, and I think some of the functionality there is similar in some way. So I think that you can, and that's kind of what I'm thinking too, is can we tell it to skip certain parts? But I also want to be mindful of the context. So if you don't have any data, and it's probably more important to go top to bottom, but if you do have data, and then you might be less interested in reviewing all the information. But also if there's a way that they can specifically maybe even say, I want to see just the description. I want to read just the description, only give me that information. I don't know if that's possible. So just doing a little bit of quick research today on this.
Yeah, I think as long as you group them up well and name them well, they get a lot more ability to jump around. So I had a blind colleague before, and he would check my designs, and as long as they get denoted as sections that are skippable or like that it's read out, then they have a lot of power and they can navigate really fast.
That's good to know.
I don't know that we'd have to move your order of the design would have to change necessarily, but the tabbing might.
Okay, that's good.
Screen reader users are primarily using their keyboard to navigate. So they anything that the normal tab index that sort of allows you to tab through elements. That's how they'll navigate down the page typically. And there's probably some videos you can find of folks using screen readers. It's fascinating to watch because it's like they get very quick at sort of interpreting what's happening. I mentioned,
sorry, in this one, like all of the breadcrumbs, that's where I was going. The breadcrumbs would be read by the screen reader every time, no matter what. So like you want to be able to skip those big chunks. Mm-hmm. Great. Sorry to cut you off.
No worries. I mentioned also the for the issue that Jeremy raised around labeling for specifically the title, like there's an attribute called the ARIA label attribute. There's a lot of ARIA attributes that are specifically for helping accessibility in assistive devices that should be sufficient. I don't know if like GitLab has specific, constraints around using those, but like that should solve the problem that you mentioned of not having a label on the title field and it's invisible to the normal user. So it, maintains the kind of sleekness from a visual perspective. So I think most of those problems should be solvable, but again, like if I'm not the expert, Jeremy would probably know, or some of the front end folks.
So that actually raises a question that I have. I noticed Donald just tagged me in the work item channel in the thread about accessibility. So it could be that that's everyone that I need to include, and I'll ask my questions there. But is there anything else that would be beneficial from an engineering perspective for me to ensure is communicated? Is there anything that I can help expand on or help anyone understand? Because obviously the way that we build this, I think is going to have a large impact as well on that experience. So what kind of information do you all perceive being beneficial? Or Donald, would that just be the folks that you tagged in that thread?
Yeah, we can start with those folks. It's mostly the other way around, like as we're doing the research. if you have any questions on like what we're capable of doing or what we should look out for as far as accessibility on the design side. Simon and Kong are kind of the experts on that. But once we get to the point of we want to start building it with accessibility in mind, then you probably want to get the front-end engineers that are working on each of the specific parts within work items involved in those conversations.
Excellent. Will do. Then I'll post my questions in that thread. And yeah, if anybody has any other questions or thoughts on any of this, feel free to ping me, or you can share it in the issue that